webinar presentation, which is Chapter Engagement, Preparing Leaders for Success with Denise Schneider, Terry Waddell, and Zulaid Milan. All right, everyone, if you'd like to go ahead, take it away.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. We're excited to have you here today. We have established a series of question portions within this webinar today, so please feel free to submit your questions so that Shannon has those and we can try to get to as many as possible throughout the webinar. The objectives today that we hope to be able to relay to you are to help you orient attendees on succession planning strategies to help you in your chapters, to provide structure for outlining your officer duties so they understand their roles and the expectations for performance, and to establish a framework for orientation for a training program, either for your officers or for your volunteer community. We're going to be discussing increasing accountability through measurable outcomes, officer orientation and officer boot camp program, and the task management tools that we utilize to keep the expectations managed.
So to set the tone for today's discussion, we want to share some perspective on the difference between interest and commitment. If we set the objective of having engaged officers and engaged members, we have to learn to distinguish someone interested from someone committed. Someone who's simply interested may have enthusiasm without endurance, whereas someone committed is results-oriented and doesn't make excuses. If you're serving on a board that sometimes loses momentum, we hope to share with you some ways to increase accountability. So we have our first polling question, and the question is, does your chapter have clear position descriptions? And the options are yes for officers only, yes for officers and volunteers, and no.
And I have placed a poll out there. We have about 68 people on the webinar, and it looks like people are going ahead and putting in their answers. If you want to just give it a few seconds and then go ahead and comment on the responses.
So we can see that there are quite a few chapters that do have clear position descriptions for officers and volunteers, and you can kind of see the importance of that initiative, you know, for all chapters. The next slide. So in 2016, the Central Florida chapter of NIGP set the objective of increasing member engagement. As we experience more retirements, it's critical for us to develop volunteers that can be part of the board succession. And naturally, the best board members typically commence as tireless volunteers. So we identified 4 key initiatives to assist us with developing talent within our organization. These were clear position descriptions, deliverables and outcomes, personal accountability, and matching efforts to results. The idea was that taking a deliberate approach to all of these would result in deliberate volunteers who are ready for achievement and they're accountable. Here, John C. Maxwell says that leadership is about taking responsibility while others are making excuses. So before the board could impose this heightened accountability on its volunteer base, we first took to the officers and made sure that the duties outlined had measurable objectives and clear deliverables. The idea is that you have to be able to measure success. So we identified all the requirements and deliverables for each board member. Additionally, someone contemplating becoming an officer has a better idea of what that commitment and expectations are for these positions. This is a critical tool to shift someone from being interested to being committed. Part of increasing the board's accountability involved more than just documenting duties, but in our case, we increased some of the board's responsibilities in order to make this change part of our association culture. So here you can see we made a change in the bylaws requiring the president to maintain accurate record of all appointees and furnish a copy of the duties to all newly appointed officers and chairmen for acknowledgement. This additional step makes a significant difference in our process. And additionally, all of these documents outlining duties need to be accessible to the membership. Here we see that accountability is the glue that ties commitment to results. To prepare our volunteers for upward mobility to a board position, we took a similar approach with each volunteer position. For each position, we have a clear position description and a required outcome or deliverable required during their term. An example you see here is our Member Retention Committee. They're responsible for disseminating information to members and non-renewals, promoting member benefits and affiliation, and each year they're responsible for launching at least one initiative towards that end. They're also responsible for annually surveying membership satisfaction. They're required to present these findings to the board on an annual basis. So with this clear outline of duties, we have consistency from year to year and we can measure success. And the idea is that a volunteer that is successful in a measurable way will increase their excitement and engagement and advance into leadership within the chapter. When we instituted these revised position duties and required acknowledgement forms before making appointments, something really interesting happened. People began to stop, just like the sign we see here. They started asking questions before they blindly signed up for appointments. And again, we saw a shift from those interested to those who took the time to reflect on these duties and ask questions and make a deliberate choice to meet the commitment. Here we see that the results achieved are in proportion to the effort applied. This is an example of some of the programs we had to modify to transition to this new culture of accountability and engagement. Our scholarship application, for instance, no longer just asks what committee you serve on or what office you hold, but it requires you to identify what your contributions were. And this is before you're eligible for scholarship points. Here you can see that as a result of their efforts, our members achieve scholarship points that give them a real sense of accomplishment and compensate them for achievement. The desire for professional development has been a big motivator for chapter engagement.
Okay, so we have one question that came up. This is from Lisa, and she writes, how do you generate interest in volunteering? And it was in caps lock, sorry caps lock, but apparently we have a difficult time for anyone to quote unquote step up.
So we have our participation scholarship, which we kind of showed the slides for here, that kind of motivate people to participate. We also try to recognize participants with award programs. We try to develop opportunities that match competencies. So if someone has a particular skill, we try to find a spot for them where they can use that skill.
Hi, it's Denise. Let me add to that, Zuli. One of the things that's really beneficial to our members is they can use their scholarship dollars to attend NIGP functions, State of Florida FAPO functions, NIGP classes, webinars that may cost money, so they can utilize their dollars to further their own professional development, and it's at their choice, so that's really been a big benefit to all of our members, and especially to those who participate on a higher level than just coming to meetings.
I would also add that what we hear a lot of times is it's about the ask. And so sometimes you have to reach out to people that might be newer to your chapter, or people that are even, longtime members of your chapter but haven't been engaged. Sometimes they're not comfortable kind of coming forward to pursue an opportunity. And if you can identify some folks that maybe haven't been engaged, just take them aside and maybe have an informal conversation with them and really encourage them to get involved, because sometimes that's all it takes to kind of get someone motivated to step in, is that somebody actually asks them to do so. Okay, I don't see any other questions, Shannon, so I think we're going to move on to the next portion of the webinar, and we'll have other opportunities for questions.
Hello again, everybody. Thank you for attending. The Central Florida chapter developed Officer Boot Camp in 2016, And we just held our second boot camp for all of the officers this past month to orient them on the bylaws, all of our program documents, their task timelines, and we'll get into that a little bit more later, code of conduct, including ethics, and we also covered the position descriptions and what really is expected of them. We met all day on a Saturday. We started at 8:30, got done about 4, and from last year to this year, we did increase our time because we had a lot more questions than we really expected that we would.
Okay, so we have another polling question for you. Does your chapter provide leadership training? And your options are yes, officer orientation, volunteer orientation, or no. Okay, so we're still waiting for the polling numbers to come through, but it looks like a significant portion of the attendees today do not have any sort of leadership training in place. So we're glad that you're on this webinar today, so we can provide you some resources potentially that you could use to develop a program for yourselves. So let's get into program development and what are the kind of things that you'll need to consider that we're going to talk through in this webinar today. And as Shannon mentioned, we did drop some additional resources in this webinar for you to download. Please take an opportunity to do so that you have those materials, and we'll be discussing those throughout this section of the webinar. But some of the things we're going to talk about in the upcoming slides will be thinking about your trainers that you want to actually be conducting the training. Who is your intended audience? Are you intending to target your officers? Are you intending to target potential officers that might be up and coming? Or is it your volunteer community, perhaps your chairs or your committee members as well? Kind of gets you thinking about who might your intended audience be for any sort of training. We want to go through some logistical things that you need to consider when developing your program, how to package your materials for your attendees, how to develop your content, what type of information are you going to provide and discuss throughout the training, and talk about some training timeframes to consider, and then post-training actions.
One of the most important things is to have trainers that are really engaged and willing to help your officers go through the training. We'd recommend that you use qualified trainers who have been through your chairs and understand your process. Past presidents are always a good option, or other officers that are interested in being a trainer is a good place to start. And then once you've trained your officers, your current officers could then become the trainers for the rest of your volunteer base. So who's your intended audience? Obviously your officers, your committee chairs, and perhaps just people that are interested in learning more about your chapter and what it means to be a volunteer, a committee chair, or an actual officer and what they need to do to get there. You need to look at your current versus your aspiring leadership. You probably all need to put some kind of a succession plan in place. So in 10 years, you have people ready, willing, and able to move up to those positions as your older volunteers start retiring. And then you need to talk about the accountability and the governance expectations. Does your audience understand the officer responsibilities and what's expected of them to help run a chapter?
Okay, so we have another polling question for you. What is the size of your chapter board? Your options are less than 5, between 5 and 10, and greater than 10. Okay, so we've still got some numbers coming in, but it looks like the majority of your chapters have between 5 and 10 members on the chapter board. So some of the things that you're going to want to consider when developing this program is logistics. There's quite a few logistics that you need to consider before you start preparing your program. One of the things you're going to want to consider is, do you have funding budgeted for this? Because you are going to have some expenses related to holding this training, and do you need to get that in the budget? Is it currently in the budget this year, or is it something that you need to consider budgeting for next year? Think about the audience, like Denise just talked about. Who's your intended audience? What number of people do you intend to invite to this particular training session? And that's going to really impact some of the other considerations that we're going to discuss, such as the size of the room that you're going to need to accommodate your audience. Is it something that you could just use a small room? Do you need a large room with a lot of AV? Things that you need to consider is, is it going to be maybe do one of your chapter members have a space available that you could use at no cost, like we did? We actually held it at one of the at Denise's procurement office. We did it on a Saturday, and she was kind enough to open up her conference training room to us so that we could use that, and we wouldn't have an expense associated with a training room. But if you have a larger audience that you intend to train, then you might need to secure some sort of facility that might have a cost associated with it. So that's something to consider in terms of your audience. You're also going to want to think about the length of your training session. And so when we implemented our first boot camp in 2016, we only allocated 4 hours, and we thought that would be sufficient time for us to get through the training materials. But what we found was that we actually were running short of time because there was so much good discussion that came out of our training that we ran a little bit short on time. And so consider building in enough time so that you have time for meaningful discussion, and don't just assume that everybody knows the material and that they may not have discussion or questions to ask. If you're going to be providing food, breakfast or lunch, depending on the time of your training session, do you have monies budgeted for that also? Make sure that you have adequate supply for everyone that's going to be attending. So all of these things need to be coordinated in advance of your marketing efforts to ensure that you have a good response to your training opportunity. So now we're going to get into packaging your materials. And you want to consider theming your materials. I would highly recommend that. For anybody that attended leadership development in the past couple years, those folks that actually facilitated that training were big on theming and big on trying to kind of make things fun for your audience. And I would definitely encourage you to consider that approach when you're doing a training session of this sort, because you want to really get them excited about the training. Especially consider if they're taking a Saturday out of their weekend to come and do training. You want to kind of make it a fun atmosphere for them to get excited about and come into. So we wanted to take an approach that would actually package our materials. So they have actually some resources to take away with them, and it kind of made it fun as well. So this is another area that you want to factor in some funding for if you intend to actually give them some materials to take home with them. When we held our training 2 weeks ago, I documented what our expenses were just to kind of give you a feel. And we had a total of 7 attendees that attended that because ours was geared just for the officers. And this also included the trainers. So we had meals, we had office supplies such as the binder that you see there. We gave away some printed bags this year. You don't see those on the screen, but you can see some shirts in the upper right-hand corner, and that's what we gave away last year that were printed with each attendee's name on the back to kind of give them ownership that, hey, I'm proud to be part of the boot camp, and here's my gear. This year we had expenses that totaled around $400, and again, we didn't have a cost associated with any sort of location rental, but this is just strictly for the materials that we wanted to give to them. A nice binder. You can see the dog tag flash drive because, again, we wanted to theme it towards a boot camp. And so all the materials that are included in the binder were also included on the flash drive for them to have as a resource. And all of that information is included that's downloadable as part of this webinar. So when you see the document that says Bootcamp Binder Contents Final, that's the contents of the binder that you see on the left-hand corner of the screen. So in keeping with the theme of packaging materials, consider the information that you're actually going to want to share with your group. And again, this may differ if you have officers that you're training. You might be focusing on strategic plan and governing documents as opposed to maybe some committee folks or committee chairs who maybe just need some orientation about their roles and responsibilities. And maybe you want to just kind of highlight these other documents but not necessarily make that your primary focus. So it really depends on who your audience is as to how you're going to package your materials that you want to present to them. So tailor your training PowerPoint based on the content. Start with this binder or what material you're going to put in here first, and then tailor your PowerPoint presentation to that material. And again, the PowerPoint presentation that I'm referring to is also a downloadable document as part of this webinar. It's the file entitled Officer Bootcamp 2017 Final. So this is actually the training PowerPoint that we went over with our attendees in addition to the contents of the binder that you can download as well. So think about what you want to include in your materials that you're going to provide to them. Do you want to include things like governing documents, program documents, budgets, any sort of forms, any planning resources that you think are relevant to your intended audience? You're going to want to consider that including those in your materials. Based on the feedback that we got after last year's boot camp, we actually added 4 more sections to our binder this year for our attendees. So it's good to get feedback from attendees, and that helps you to make sure that you're putting out a good product going forward. So you can see the graphic on the right-hand side of this screen. That gives you the table of contents to our binder materials this year, and we ended up adding 4 more sections, like I said, and the binder was accompanied by the flash drive that included all of those materials that you can download as well. So I want to focus in a little bit. This is actually one of the slides directly out of our training PowerPoint presentation. This is the outline. So this accompanies the binder that they received when they arrived. And we're going to go over some things that this is basically the framework. This is the framework for the on-site training. So in subsequent slides, we're going to give you an idea of some specific items included, because you can see that we kind of tailored it towards boot camp. So it talks about special field manuals, special forces manuals, tactical resources, and allied forces. You might be questioning what in the world is that. So we'll go into a little bit of detail, but we tried to make it fun and package it, so we wanted to also theme the entire PowerPoint as much as we could as well. In 2017, as a result of the prior year surveys, we added slides that address parliamentarian procedures, chapter events, and then an opportunity for officer transition. And that's an important time for them to have face-to-face discussion to either transition documents or just to have a little Q&A, amongst themselves. So this should complement your resource materials. This training presentation should complement your binder and your flash drive. And as you advance in the presentation, the binder and material should be referenced and discussed. So we don't just focus on the outline you see on the screen. We're actually digging into the materials within the binder to have some purposeful discussion about that content.
All right, this is the Special Forces Field Manuals, and our question to ourselves as trainers was, are we providing our officers with the resources that they need, and do they understand them? So they all got the full copy of the bylaws. We had long discussions about them. We saw some places where we need to make some changes. We included all the program documents and the policies that go with them, and again had discussions on all of that. And then we also went over Robert's Rules of Orders, because there was still some confusion about who could make a motion, who could second, and then the discussion needed to follow before you actually took a vote. So we went through the Robert's Rules of Orders with the entire group so everybody had a much better understanding of how that works. And we do also have a parliamentarian as part of our committee structure that's there with the actual Robert's Rules books in case something comes up during a meeting, so those questions can be answered. And we did email out the bylaws and the policies to everyone prior to this webinar, so if anybody has any questions at this time, we'll go ahead and answer them.
Okay, so getting into developing your content, this is one of the areas where I had identified previously that we framed it as tactical resources. So I just want to kind of give you some insight into what was included in this section. And this section would be things like if you have strategic planning documents, if you have a task timeline or some sort of way to manage your tasks by assignments with deadlines, and we're going to go into that in a further part of the presentation also. But if you have any sort of tools that help people stay on task and with associated deadlines, this would be an area that you probably would want to include that as a tactical resource. NIGP chapter resources we highlight in this section, such as webinars that might be available for officers, and a lot of the information that's available on NIGP's website in the chapter resources area, as well as Nsight. We want to promote Nsight so that our folks can sign up as chapter leaders to be engaged in those discussions and have access to any sort of shared documents that are loaded. We also want to introduce the Leadership Development Symposium as a tactical resource for them, and we do fund at least one officer to attend that annually so that they have the benefit of getting that information as well. And then also Forum. We introduce Forum as another tactical resource because these are training opportunities. So anytime that we can get officers that are able to receive some training that might benefit our chapter, we're going to try to support that if we have the funding associated to do so. So your tactical resources section would include any sort of resources outside of your governing documents that are available to your chapter leaders to reference. So the Allied Forces section really answers the question, who are our partners? Who are the people that we are basically going to battle with? And so this is NIGP, and you can see Jennifer Steffens on the screen here because she's a great allied force for any of our chapters throughout NIGP. We have her contact information because we want all of our chapter officers to be aware of who Jennifer is and how to contact her. We have information that includes how to request a chapter visit from your ambassadors, information like that related to basically associates that are going to help our officers be able to conduct their duties. So we also identify in this section any chapter members that we have that are serving on NIGP boards, councils, committees, auxiliary boards, and then we also identify who our chapter ambassadors are that are assigned to our specific area. So it's important to give them kind of faces with the names, and so we do grab their pictures off NIGP's website and put it in our PowerPoint presentation. Until they have the benefit of actually meeting these folks face-to-face, we want them to be aware that they're available for them as a resource. So think about anyone that serves as a resource to your membership, and that's who should be identified in this section, and how they can be contacted as well. So things to consider in terms of your time frames. You want to make sure you have sufficient time to thoroughly cover all the content. And so that would include the content that you have in the PowerPoint training presentation, in addition to all the materials that you might give them in hard copy, such as the binder with the different documents. You want to make sure that you have sufficient time to address both areas and take any questions and be able to address those at that time. And so what we found during the first year, and I shared this with you previously, is that we kind of ran out of time because we hadn't considered we'd had so much discussion. We took for granted perhaps that there were that many questions to be asked, and it was great. That just showed that it was really a great setting that we did this training and gave them the opportunity to sit together, and it really helped build some teamwork, I think, among the officers also. But it gave us a chance to have some meaningful dialogue. But in the event that you think, I only have a finite amount of time and we've got to be out of here by a certain time, then you might want to consider establishing time frames per topic to kind of keep yourself on task and make sure that you're able to get through all of the materials. But I would suggest that you count on a lot of discussion. This year we actually expanded the boot camp and we built in 2 extra hours for the additional content that I mentioned that we added to the binder, and also to accommodate the discussion. And what we found this year, even though we expanded it an extra 2 hours, is that we used every last minute of the scheduled time.
One of the things that we did this year for our second boot camp was we actually gave all the participants a certification of completion. We also went over last year's survey because that really helped us to improve our boot camp this year. And then we advised everyone that we were going to do a post-training survey again this year so we could get comments back on what worked, what didn't work, where did they want more information, where did they feel that they didn't have the time to discuss things in depth like they wanted to. So we found that the survey is really helpful to the trainers in improving the training for every year that we do this.
And as an attendee, I can share that the first year that I participated, I was the chapter president, and I felt as though the meeting really united our group. I found it particularly impactful that the officer boot camp was presented by past presidents. To me, the engagement of the past presidents in developing and providing this curriculum to us demonstrated that there was a legacy to protect, and it really elevated the board's sense of accountability. And this year, I was able to participate as the immediate past president, and I'll share that after serving for 6 years on the board, we sometimes experience a little bit of volunteer fatigue towards the end of a term, but attending this latest boot camp really just re-energized the group and got us excited for the new year. The curriculum had changed slightly based on last year's feedback, and I felt as though every part of the agenda had really stimulated discussion and collaboration.
Okay, so we have another opportunity for you to submit any questions that you would like to have addressed. It can be specific to this section, or you can hold it till the end of the presentation, whatever you prefer. But we'll give it a minute or so to see if we have any questions that come in before we advance to the next section.
I don't see any questions in the Q&A box, so
Okay.
feel free to go on.
Okay.
So we have our next polling question, and it's, have you been successful and how do you know? So the options are, we're actively monitoring our strategic plan, we discuss tasks at board meetings, we regularly communicate to ensure tasks are completed timely.
We have about 72 on the webinar, and it looks like only about 16 have responded. So we kind of give you 3 options here, and let's give it a little bit of time so people kind of work through that. While we're waiting, we did have a question. Do you want to go ahead and take it, or do you want to wait?
Sure. Let's go ahead while people are populating with the polling question.
All right, this is from Linda. Would you suggest we have separate boot camps for officer and chairs?
I think it's something that you'll want to, I would recommend maybe taking it separate just in the planning stages and say, if we were to train the officers, what content would we train them on? And if we were to train the chairs, what content would we be training them on? And if your answer seems to be consistent, that you have similar material, then I would suggest doing it together, because you may find that some of your chairs are the people that are going to be moving up into officers. So I don't think that it hurts to expose the chairs to the information the officers are getting, but I think you just really have to consider what type of information are you trying to relate given those different positions.
Great, thank you. It looks like the voting has kind of slowed down. If you want to go ahead and comment on that and go on.
So it looks like the majority regularly communicates to ensure that tasks are completed, and then second to that, it's we discuss at board meetings, which is similar to what we were doing previously, but we, as a result of the approach that we took, we started using task management tools to kind of increase our ability to track our objectives. So in accordance with increasing your chapter's accountability, you can track engagement by monitoring your key tasks. For this purpose, we utilized a software called Drop Task that's available online. Drop Task has a few different subscriptions ranging from free to about $6 a month, and it allows you to assign work and monitor progress. And for us, it allowed us to communicate deadlines and initiatives in a collaborative environment. So here you can see we organize tasks by month, and we categorize initiatives by status, urgency, importance, and effort. And you can see the little photos on the left-hand side. We use those to make assignments. So we drag a person onto one of those little bubbles, and that assigns that to them. And when they complete that task, it keeps track of that. Here you can see that we establish a checkpoint for assessments and goals. to make sure that overall we're meeting chapter objectives. So it's not just individual objectives. So in June, we assess committee progress to see if any committees have stalled or if we need to make any reappointments. And we also monitor the board's progress against our strategic initiatives for the year. And here you can see a different version of a task timeline made in Excel. This achieves the same objectives as Drop Task. It identifies the time period, the initiative, and the person responsible. We find that tools like these contribute to engagement because they set a roadmap for success. As we develop all these materials and publish them for the membership, we see more inquiries from members interested in increasing their commitment, and we feel like we're doing the utmost to develop future accountable and committed talent for our chapter.
We want you to be proactive and really help your officers and your committee chairs to be successful. If they're successful, they'll want to keep volunteering, which will help keep your chapter strong and help you with your succession planning. So the boot camp is to prepare your volunteers for success. It should help you grow your volunteer base as you establish more and more training. You need to really emphasize the scholarship eligibility for your volunteers and your officers and explain the rewards that are theirs if they'll volunteer and assist. And they don't have to be a chair. They can just be on a committee. And this whole thing really supports the succession plan for your chapter. So not only are you helping out your current officers and boards, but down the road you'll be helping out your future volunteers and hopefully your future officers and board members.
Great. Thank you so much. This is the last slide. We're kind of winding down with this. There was one other question. This came in from Renee. And will you please send the information regarding the task management? And I just posted to the webinar chat board. You can see I posted the link for you all because I thought this was just so cool. I've never seen drop tasks before, and I'm always looking for stuff like this. So this looks really great. And as you all can see, Carrie and Julie and Denise have their contact information if you have any questions for them. Are there any other, I see a couple questions rolling in here, so I'm going to go ahead and read them. Valerie says, did your chapter offer subject matter experts to train or teach outside of the chapter officers?
So at our chapter meetings, we have a variety of trainings that we offer. We do 2 workshops a year. Sometimes we hire speakers to come in. So I would say that most of our training is not coming from our chapter officers.
Great. Are there any other questions? Both Renee and Valerie say thank you.
So again, I just would say that if you come up with any questions, if you're trying to develop some sort of training program for your volunteer community, your officers, feel free to reach out to any of us. We're happy to, lend you any advice, provide you any resources, answer any questions that you might have in developing your program, because we want it to be successful for you so that you can have a positive, successful training experience for your membership.
I'm actually I have a question just on that drop task product. I remember you said that you were able to somehow measure progress against strategic objectives.
Yes.
How do you do that? Is that within drop task or?
Yeah, so with drop task, you assign a deadline to items, and so you can track the history of that item, if it met the deadline, if it didn't meet the deadline. And so because we have that checkpoint in June, let's say we have a marketing committee and they're supposed to put out a marketing piece once a year. So if that marketing piece hasn't come out by mid-year, we make an inquiry to see if they're on track, if they have a plan, and if they don't, we consider making a reappointment at that point, so that all of our chapter initiatives stay on track.
Oh, great. So that's like a deadline, and do you get just an automated reminder?
We do. We get reminders if tasks are overdue, and then we also, it depends on how much you want to be notified. You could get a notification every time a task is updated, or only when a task is completed, or only when it's overdue. It really just depends how often you want to be notified. And what's great about it is that you could bring someone else into your task to help you achieve the objective and collaborate on the task within Drop Task. You can send updates. You can request updates. So if I assign a task, as president, I assign a task to the secretary, I just have to click a button and say, I'm requesting an update on 3 different items. And so they can provide that update in Drop Task, or they can, pick up the phone and call.
Interesting. That seems very efficient to me.
Sometimes we're using our business email for chapter activities, so that kind of reduces all the exchanges going back and forth, and it kind of still keeps things moving forward. You get a snapshot as to your progress, how many things are coming off of that list. So we did it on a month-by-month basis. So if we knew we had 10 things to achieve in March, and it's the end of March, and we still have 8 things up there, we probably have to have a teleconference, and we probably have to move some things along.
Great. Do you all use that for your procurement jobs as well, or just for the chapters?
We use it within our procurement operations here at Orange County.
Oh, okay. Well, that seems pretty efficient to me. I think that looks really awesome.
Yeah, it tracks the history of an item, which is why we use it here, so that when you delegate something, you could see if it's changed hands, you could see if it's outstanding, and you don't lose it.
Yeah, great.
And it also has the capability for you to email a task to it. So if you get an email and it's actionable, you can forward that email to Drop Task, and it becomes, its own little bubble.
Interesting. Okay. I like the little bubbles. I thought that was kind of cool. All right. Does anybody else have any other questions about this? Kind of quiet. I don't see anything coming in. So, do you all have any parting comments or thoughts?
Thank you all for joining us. We'll be happy to hear about the progress that you have in your chapter and the successes that you have in your chapter. So if you implement a boot camp program, we'd love to hear